The sun had not yet crested the rim of the canyon, but already the air held the dry hush of judgment. Hannah Bell stood on the edge of the doctor's camp, clutching her bundled child to her chest like a prayer unanswered. Dust clung to the hem of her dress, and her boots, cracked and tired, sank slightly into the sand with each restless step. Her boy was only weeks old, too small, they said, too weak. His breaths were shallow as paper rustling, his eyes not yet learning how to focus. "Won't last the season," the camp physician had said without lifting his eyes. "Nature's way, sometimes. Better you let him go before it breaks you." But Hannah hadn't broken, not yet. She walked 3 days from the Mormon colony in Winslow with her son wrapped close and her doubts trailing behind her like a shadow that would not separate. The other women back home whispered of curses, of divine reckoning. She'd seen them look past her as if grief had made her a ghost already. She had birthed the boy alone in Alinta during a summer storm, the midwife arriving hours too late. The wind that night had sounded like something being torn open. Since then, nothing had felt whole. A cough rattled from the baby's chest. Hannah lowered her head, pressing her lips to his temple, her hand adjusting the wool shawl that barely held in the warmth. There was a tremble in her fingers. She hadn't slept more than an hour in 3 days. Each moment held the breath of waiting, for silence, for stillness, for death to claim what the world had already dismissed. There were no offers of help here. The physician's tent was set at the edge of a makeshift town of traders, missionaries, and gold diggers chasing fortune along the canyon's edge. People passed her without pausing. She might have been a mirage to them, another lost mother hoping to rewrite God's will with sheer desperation. That evening, as the orange light spilled low and gold across the cliffs, Hannah wandered down into the canyon itself. It wasn't reason that led her. It was a pull, like the earth was whispering some old memory she hadn't yet lived. The boy whimpered, then fell quiet again, his breath like a sigh of smoke. She followed the narrow path until it twisted near a waterfall, its waters pouring down the rock like glass in motion. There, beneath the overhang of red stone and shadow, stood a woman. She wore turquoise beads strung tight across her chest, and her hair, long and streaked with iron gray, caught the wind like a black sail. Her eyes were dark, set deep into a face carved by time and weather. She did not flinch at the sight of Hannah nor look away from the child in her arms. "Come," the woman said, voice as low as thunder beneath the surface. "Sit." Hannah hesitated, then she sat. The canyon quieted around them, the wind caught in its stone throat. The woman didn't speak for some time. She laid down a blanket, pulled a clay pot from her satchel, and began mixing herbs whose names Hannah didn't know but whose scent felt familiar, like something from a dream or the far-off corners of her childhood. "He is sick," the woman said at last. Hannah could only nod, her voice too raw to trust. "They told you he is not meant to live." She flinched. The woman's voice was not cruel, only certain. Hannah pressed the child closer, as if to shield him from truth. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I am Sani. My people come from this canyon. We listen to the old ways. We see what others forget." Hannah felt her chest twist tight. "Can you save him?" Sani did not answer right away. Instead, she reached out slowly, placing 2 fingers against the child's brow. Her touch was neither soft nor rough, just real present. The boy stirred, his breath hitched. "I cannot promise life," she said, "but I can show you that he is not alone, and neither are you." The tears Hannah had buried for days began to rise. She didn't let them fall, not yet. Sani opened the clay pot. The scent bloomed in the air, sage, pine, something bitter and grounding. She began to speak again, in a language Hannah didn't know but felt in her bones like wind through branches. And somewhere beneath the moon that began to rise, silver and silent over the rim, the child took a deeper breath than he had since birth. It was not healing, not yet. But it was something else. Beginning, the stars came out in clusters that night, dense and sharp above the canyon, as if the heavens themselves were leaning closer. Sani had built a small fire near the overhang, feeding it with juniper and dry cedar that gave off a scent both ancient and clean. Hannah sat with her knees drawn up, the baby still in her arms, though his rest had softened. He no longer breathed like something breaking. There was rhythm now, uncertain but steady, like footsteps learning their path. Sani moved with quiet purpose, stirring the pot over the flames, its contents now a deep, earthen brew. She ladled a small amount into a carved gourd and offered it to Hannah. Not for him, she said, for you. Hannah hesitated, then drank. It was bitter, then strangely sweet, like something found at the edge of wildness. It filled her stomach with heat, and for the first time in weeks her hands stopped shaking. They didn't speak for a long while. The fire crackled, the wind lifted the scent of rock and water and pine, and somewhere below, an owl called out with the gravity of old stories. Sanny finally broke the silence. You carry more than the child. Hannah looked up, startled. You carry guilt, shame. Someone put it on you and you kept it. Hannah opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her eyes burned. It's not just his sickness, she said. Back home, they think I brought it on, that I wanted him out of wedlock, that I brought shame on the colony. They see his weakness as proof. She paused, her voice fraying. They told me to let him die cleanly, that God would forgive me if I didn't fight too hard. Sanny stirred the fire with a stick, sparks lifting like spirits. I was married, Hannah said. He was older, came to us as a preacher from Missouri. I was 17. My father said it was God's will. Her jaw tightened. He wasn't kind. There it was, the weight she'd buried beneath her spine. Sanny didn't respond. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small wooden carving of a bird, its wings tucked, eyes forward. She placed it between them. My mother carved this, she said. She used to say birds carry stories on their backs, that when we speak the truth, they hear it and take it to the stars. Hannah stared at the carving, her thumb rubbing circles over the baby, swaddled back. I ran the night he died, she whispered. My husband, he fell drunk from a horse, no one saw, I didn't help him, just watched. She looked up, daring Sanny to judge her. I was glad. Sanny's gaze didn't change. She reached across the fire, laid her hand over Hannah's. You survived. The word sat heavy between them, not a judgment, not even a comfort, a fact. The baby stirred. Hannah looked down, his mouth moved, reaching. She adjusted her shawl and let him feed. He latched weakly, but he latched. Sanny watched them both. You will stay with me, she said. A while, the canyon is old, it remembers, it can teach. Hannah blinked at her. Why help me? You don't even know me. Sanny's eyes shone, but not with softness, with knowing. Because once, no one believed my child should live either. The fire cracked. Hannah did not ask what had happened next, not yet. Instead, she leaned back against the canyon wall, her child at her breast, and listened to the water falling in the distance like time being measured. There was no comfort, not yet. But there was room. And for now, that was enough. Morning arrived pale and cool, the sun still tangled in the canyon's rim. A hush lay over the red walls, the kind that came not from absence but from watching. Hannah rose with her child still bundled to her chest, his sleep deeper now, his small body less clenched. She stepped out from the overhang where they'd slept beside the fire's last breath and found Sanny already gathering water at the pool beneath the waterfall. The older woman's silhouette moved with an ease that made the world seem less jagged. She didn't look back when she spoke. You will help today. There is work in healing. Hannah nodded, the simple act of being given something to do grounding her more than she expected. Sanny handed her a satchel made from woven willow bark and motioned toward a grove of cottonwoods downstream. Wild mint grows beneath the shade. You'll know it by the scent. Bring it back. Hannah hesitated, eyeing the narrow trail that led downward. I won't let anything happen to him, Sanny said, taking the baby from her with arms as sure as stone. The trail down was rough in places, loose gravel and slick rock, but her boots found grip, her legs remembering what it meant to move for more than fear. The cottonwoods rustled above the creek, and sure enough, beneath their cool canopy, the mint clustered like green fire, its leaves bright and sharp with life. As she knelt, crushing a leaf between her fingers, the scent rose, bright and unmistakable, like summer remembering itself. By the time she returned, sweat darkened her back and dust streaked her cheeks, but her bag was full. Sanny took it without word, only nodding once. In the shade, they crushed the leaves together, mixing them with heated stones and laying them in folded cloths. Sanny pressed one gently to the baby's chest as he slept. This helps the lungs remember. As evening neared, other women began arriving, quiet figures who moved like deer along the canyon trails. Some were old, bent like wind-worn trees, others younger, with babies strapped to their backs or baskets slung over hips. They brought herbs, wood, a brace of rabbit, even a bundle of dyed cloth. No one asked Hannah anything. No one looked at her with the thin-lipped judgment she'd come to know back home. They simply included her, as if her presence had already been decided upon by something greater than agreement. Later, by firelight, they shared food in a ring, laughter rising now and then in short bursts like birds startled into flight. Sanny passed Hannah a bowl of stew and gestured to the woman beside her. "She's called Massey. Her daughter was born with her foot turned under. They told her to bury her, said it was a mark. But the girl runs now, climbs trees faster than her brothers." Another woman nodded, then spoke low. "My son didn't speak until he was 4. The healer in Flagstaff said he was broken in the mind, but he listens better than anyone, remembers everything. He plants by moon cycles." Hannah stared at the flicker of flame in her bowl, something soft unraveling behind her ribs. They weren't just surviving. They were thriving in defiance of the verdicts passed down by men too quick to call difference a curse. She looked at her child, his brow no longer so furrowed, his breath no longer a ghost. The tears came then, slow and unceremonious, sliding down her face and into the stew untouched in her lap. Sanny watched her but didn't speak. There was no need. The canyon had begun to receive her, and she at last was beginning to receive herself. The days began to spool together like hand-spun thread, each one marked by small acts of care that felt, to Hannah, like learning how to live all over again. The child, whom she had named Elias though she'd spoken the name to no one, grew steadier in her arms. His eyes, once glassy and uncertain, now followed light. He made small sounds in his throat, not quite cries, not quite words, but declarations all the same. Sanny taught without lecturing. Her lessons came through motion, through task. They dug roots in the red earth, steeped leaves in boiling spring water, laid warm stones on aching joints. Hannah's hands, once only familiar with the sharp lines of domesticity, laundry boards, tin pots, stitched seams, grew calloused in new ways. She learned to tell plants by their scent, to feel for sickness beneath the skin like ripples beneath still water. And in quiet moments, she told Elias stories, not the ones from scripture that had once been her only tether, but stories about stars and sparrows, about brave girls who walked into the desert and came back with names no one had dared give them before. One morning, a rider came. He was dust-covered and lean, with a rifle strapped across his back and the look of someone who expected to be feared. He dismounted with the jerky grace of someone used to sleeping rough and stood in the canyon's mouth like he was challenging the rock itself. "Looking for a white woman," he said. "Tall, yellow hair, took off from the colony in Winslow with a child not rightly hers." The air went still. Hannah stood behind the trees, heart hammering. The baby stirred against her chest, and she backed further into the shadows. Sanny stepped forward. "There are many women here," she said. "None stolen." The man's eyes narrowed. "The boy's sick, ain't meant to live. Father died last winter, she's not right in the head. Church says she needs returning." Hannah could taste iron behind her teeth. The fire inside her had shifted, no longer panic, but something sharper. She thought of the herbs she had learned to grind, the wounds she had watched close, the nights she had stayed awake to count Elia's breaths. She thought of the other women, of the quiet recognition in their eyes. This canyon was not a hiding place. It was sanctuary, it was truth. Before the man could push past Sanny, another figure stepped from the trees, Massey, her daughter at her side, silent as moonlight. Then 2 more women, then another. They did not touch the man. They did not need to. They just stood. The man muttered something under his breath and turned back toward his horse, unsettled by what he could not name. The canyon watched him leave. That night Hannah sat by the fire with Elias in her lap. Sanny sat across from her, carving something from a piece of soft wood. "When they come again," Hannah said, "and they will, what do I do?" Sanny didn't look up from her carving. "You stay true, you stay strong." "And if that's not enough?" Sanny looked up then. Her eyes glinted in the firelight like obsidian kissed by flame. "Then you fight, not with fists, with knowing, with the life you make from what they threw away." She handed Hannah the carving. It was another bird, smaller than the first, but with its wings open. "To teach your child," Sanny said, "that flight is not escape, it is becoming." Hannah pressed the carving to her chest. In the fire's warmth, Elias stirred, then smiled, a small, lopsided thing, fragile as a sapling and just as full of promise. And for the first time since his birth, Hannah allowed herself to believe, deep in the marrow of her bones, that her son was not only meant to live. He was meant to rise. The rains came late that year, slow-moving and stubborn, threading the canyon with a silver hush. Each drop raised the scent of earth and memory, and when the clouds finally broke fully, the land bloomed. Desert primrose and evening rainflowers unfolded in quiet defiance of the long drought. Water pooled in stone hollows, and the creek rose, gurgling like a voice just finding its tone. Elias was nearing 3 moons old when he laughed for the first time. It came sudden and round, bursting from his chest while Hannah washed his small feet in the stream. She froze, her hands wet and trembling, and looked into his eyes. He laughed again, this time at the way the water lapped against a floating twig. It was a sound that echoed across the canyon walls, like a bell struck in joy. A sound no one had expected him to make. Sandy heard it from across the rocks and looked up from her weaving. She didn't speak, only gave Hannah a slow nod, as if a silent promise had just been fulfilled. Later that evening, as the stars emerged behind shifting clouds, Hannah joined the other women near the high ledge where a fire had been built. Sandy was drawing patterns into the sand with a stick, circles within circles, spirals that mimicked the sun's path or perhaps something deeper. The women watched in reverence. Hannah felt Elias breathing against her collarbone, and she rocked gently, her body now attuned to the shape of his needs before he could even voice them. One of the elders, Yiska, leaned in close and offered Hannah a stone wrapped in a piece of dyed hide. It was smooth and blue-gray, worn down by river time. "For his naming," Yiska said. "We do not name them until the canyon knows them." Hannah blinked, caught off guard. "I already named him." Yiska nodded once, "But now you speak it aloud with us." The fire cracked, sending up sparks that danced like fireflies. All the women turned toward her. Hannah's voice came out softer than she intended, but sure. "His name is Elias." The canyon held the sound. The women repeated it once together, Elias. A quiet chant, a baptism not of water, but of belonging. In the days that followed, word came from upriver. Another missionary was arriving, one with ties to the government registry. With him came news of new orders. Children born to unwed mothers in territories were to be accounted for, perhaps taken to settlements for proper care. It was said gently, but it was a violence wrapped in silk. Hannah stood beside Sandy in the shadows of dusk when the message was delivered. "They want to weigh him," she said bitterly. "Measure him like stock, decide if I'm fit to keep him." Sandy's jaw was tight. "Then we won't let them." "You mean hide again?" "No," Sandy said, "we will walk forward." And so they did. 3 days later, when the missionary arrived, escorted by 2 stern-faced officials, they were met not by silence or shame, but by a line of women standing tall at the canyon's mouth. Each held a child, some whole, some limping, some silent, some laughing, none of them hidden. Hannah stood at the center, Elias on her hip, his face turned toward the wind. The missionary dismounted and blinked at the scene, unprepared. "Where is the mother who calls herself Hannah Bell?" he asked. "I'm here." She stepped forward, shoulders square. She looked nothing like the girl who had arrived weeks ago, hollow-eyed and desperate. This woman had weather in her veins now, canyon dust in her lungs, and a child who no longer breathed like he was dying. "You've no marriage record," the official beside the missionary said. "No kin to vouch for your care, no means." "I have hands," Hannah replied, "and heart, and I have him." She nodded to Elias, whose small hand gripped the bird carving she had tied to his wrap. "And if you try to take him," she added, "you'll have to explain to every woman here why they weren't enough, why their way doesn't count." The missionary looked past her, saw Sandy watching with her eyes like polished stone, saw Massey and her fast-climbing daughter, saw the circle that had formed behind this mother the world tried to unmake. He said nothing. The canyon, again, said everything. That night no child was taken. And for the first time Hannah sang, not a hymn from the colony, but something new, something shaped like roots, like riverbend, like Elia's laughter in the morning. By the end of summer, the air had turned gold around the edges. The wind moved softer through the canyon, tugging at hair and shawls like a friend reluctant to say goodbye. The leaves of the cottonwoods began to dry at their tips, and the birds flew lower, their shadows skimming across the creek like signatures on old parchment. Hannah rose with the dawn now, not out of fear but habit. She would wrap Elias against her back and hike the trails above the rim where the sky opened wide and unbroken. He cooed softly there, lulled by her steps and the whispering wind. She spoke to him often on those walks, not to fill the silence, but to give him a world built of words that honored his breath, his being. Sandy walked beside her some days, silent, her presence as steady as stone. Other days Hannah went alone, though she was never truly so. The canyon had accepted her. The birds no longer startled at her approach. The deer near the upper pools would pause, watching her pass with unbothered eyes. And the child had grown, his body no longer delicate as blown glass, his limbs beginning to push outward with the stubbornness of life. He grabbed at her necklace one morning, and she laughed out loud, a sound that had once seemed foreign in her mouth, now easy. The women began calling him Little Fire, not for his color or cry, but for the way he endured, small, bright, unyielding. One evening, Sandy handed Hannah a woven cradle board. "It's yours now, for walking, for days longer than today." Hannah ran her fingers over the smooth wood, the tightly wrapped cord. She had seen Sandy use one like it, the old way. A child strapped in safely, upright, close to the heartbeat of the mother. "There's no price." Sandy's face was unreadable. "There's only continuation. You'll teach someone else when the time comes." Hannah swallowed. "How will I know?" "You'll recognize the silence in her eyes." That night by the fire, the women passed around a bowl of mashed beans and roasted squash. No celebration had been called, but the warmth felt like one. Massey's daughter danced near the edge of the flame, her laughter wild and her feet sure. Yiska hummed something low and ancient, and the canyon seemed to listen. Hannah looked down at Elias, his mouth sticky with milk, his eyes heavy with sleep. She held him with the gentleness of one who had nearly lost everything. Her scars, once raw and buried, had softened. They would not vanish, but they no longer ached with every breath. Later, under the stars, she sat beside Sandy one last time before returning upriver with the change of season. Not to the colony, but to a place further on, land that waited, land that did not yet know her name. "I don't know what comes next," Hannah said. "You don't have to," Sandy replied. "You've made it far enough to decide." The wind passed through the canyon, stirring the embers. Elias stirred too, then settled. And Hannah, who had been cast aside, doubted, marked for loss, now held her child beneath the ancient stars, her back straight, her eyes forward. He was not a mistake, he was not a curse. He was proof of survival, of defiance, of a love that chose him every hour, even when no one else had. And as the firelight flickered across her face, Hannah Bell became what no one had expected her to be. Not a mother by accident, but a mother by flame.